think now's a good time to get started. I'm gonna just introduce Attila really quick. Attila Varszegi, a very good friend of mine. We spent 4 months together this summer doing a CCBR internship. So we were traveling across Western Canada, went to BC and also Winnipeg, advocating for life for the preborn and giving various presentations to different community groups that we traveled to. This is a presentation that he prepared during the internship and totally blew my mind when he gave it. And so I'm really, really excited to have him all the way down here from Calgary tonight to give the talk. So please welcome Attila. And also we'll be done here in by 8:30. Yeah. So, yeah.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Deirdre. So, yeah, plan is to go to about 8, and then we'll do some questions and answers, maybe some discussion if we have any interest in that. So basically, the way this started is that I was posed with a question, right, which was this one: what effect does the law have on abortions and maternal mortality? So, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, a really common point that comes up is, okay, show of hands, somebody answer this question now. A common point that comes up from people trying to make the case that abortions need to be legal. Yes, Conrad.
Because if you make it illegal, won't they just get unsafe abortions leading to death, right?
Right. Maternal mortality, exactly, thank you. So that's a very common point that comes up. And so this was the idea. Okay, well, Attila, would you be so kind as to follow this question up and see what happens? So, naturally, I got a funny comment for you guys to break the ice a little bit. So this was me looking it up. No, I'm kidding. You're right, and everyone else is an idiot. I trust this site to tell the truth. Right? I think if we're going to be honest, that's a lot of us. Right? Especially in today's day and age, right? We find a website, it says something that we're like, oh, that's exactly it. Ha ha ha. I told you dogs were better than cats, and you know. Then your friend looks up at a cat site and is like, no, but look at this. No, your friend's wrong. Dogs are better than cats. But other than that, we do this a lot. So what I want to talk about at first, before we dig any further, is bias. Okay? So, real quick, who can tell me what bias is? Amberly.
I mean, bias is when you're unfairly prejudiced for or against one position or group.
Okay, so something that might make you, so an example of bias might be, let's say, an example of bias would be, I make chocolate ice cream, just uniquely chocolate ice cream. And then there's a big debate on what ice cream is the best flavor, and I go and I'm like, no, guys, here's all the evidence that chocolate ice cream is clearly the superior flavor to vanilla. Bias, obviously, right? Because it's in my best interest for people to prefer chocolate ice cream because I would make a lot of money. I would stand to gain a massive, tremendous profit from that. Does that make sense? Okay, so what are some, maybe let's just take a minute, okay? And I want you to just talk to your neighbor, okay? This is gonna be very, I hope you didn't come here thinking, oh my goodness, my day's done, I'm just gonna sit here and just listen. No, this is interactive. So turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself if you don't know each other, and just take a minute and talk about what you think are some examples of bias that you might find. What would make a study a biased study? Talk to her all day long.
If it's because look really silly. And generally, they want.
So often sponsored by someone, and often. I have my roommate always taking one process statistics. Keep your graphs. What you're representing. For example, if you have a graph showing yourself in one row, check the scale of the graph to make it reliably fixed. playing with how stats were designed to make it more favorable.
Find like an example of bias.
Example of bias, like trace of bias.
That's just one aspect of how you can tweak increase research to show one side or another. By changing skills, by changing information.
Yeah, and it's one
And
of
that's
those
how
things
you
where
break
just because a study is funded by an interest group doesn't
Oh, yeah.
that is fine, but it does make like
Especially if they don't tell you that it's fucking
Yeah,
bias.
there's something, and that's where you're very meticulous in evaluating it, so see whether
Do you have any other thoughts?
methodology
I'm
is
thinking
sound or
perhaps if you're looking for something that fits within certain criteria, but it's not a black and white criteria, and you want more from this individual, you can blur the line so that it includes more I'm saying, I'm trying to say gun control doesn't work because say the state that has gun laws has more deaths from guns, and I'm trying to increase it. So I can include the
Yeah, well,
criteria
no, it makes sense
to
that like,
be, like
as a
say,
general
the
rule,
gun fall,
anything that
fires
receives
on. No, like gunning, there was a gun action, and I include that in my criteria.
it's like
Makes that stat look
these
more
different
favorable.
nonprofits and NGOs all of a sudden like, oh, so you have
So,
to develop
blurring
the policies
criteria.
because, oh, you get money for helping enforce these policies.
Okay,
Just like percentage
so-
bias if they were given money for any budget.
now's your moment to share. So who'd like to share what you guys came up with? Now I'll put them up on the board. So some signs of bias, or how would you know that something is biased, or yeah.
But the biggest thing seems to be the funding, who stands to gain the most from whatever the results of the data show.
Okay.
And generally that's following the money.
Follow the money. Absolutely. A really good example of that, of course, is studies on smoking. That's a pretty common one. The smoking lobby, if you will, smoking companies funded a lot of those studies back in the day. Just a pretty common one that gets thrown around. Anything else? Okay.
Also, like, if they're trying to hide their bias, that's
Okay.
usually a very good sign.
If they're trying to hide their bias, what do you mean by that?
Well, as in like, if I'm very public about, yeah, the smoking companies gave us $1 million for this, but look, we still did everything right, as opposed to, what, no, we don't get any money from them, I'll take that money.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you find things that are a little bit hidden or sneaky, yeah. So trying to hide. That's actually a really good one. Yeah. Trying to hide. Maybe I'll just put hide connections. Ties?
something like that.
Connections. Okay.
A related example of that would be the fact that like mainstream news media tries to present itself as neutral, but when you actually look at like the number, like for example the states, like it's like 95+% of news people belong to the Democratic Party, and like 95+ of donations given by media people to like political parties or like to the Democrats and stuff like that, where it's like maybe you're not entirely neutral there because that's a pretty skewed number.
Yeah. So yeah, phone neutral. Absolutely. Anything else? Okay, so another one that I don't know that I thought of a little bit would also be, I think I heard Conrad mentioning something like that, but just if they're being overly picky about their sources or something like that, right? So you're not looking maybe at a broad scope of sources, but you're looking at one thing. You know, you might, if everything points to one source, you might go, oh, you know, is there a bias? Is that the one that supports your stance? So. Sources, yeah, cherry picking, perfect, yeah. Okay, that's all right. Anything else? Yes.
If there's political gain behind it, or if they're part of an organization that is openly on one side or the other.
Okay. So almost like so, not trying to hide it, but like openly.
I'm openly biased.
Yeah, openly interested in it, having interests.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like I think if the beef farmers of Alberta put out a study, you might guess what's in the study.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, you guys. So let's go on. So this is what happened. Is I started digging into it. Here's my little story. We're gonna go on a nice little story. So I came to Google like any normal human. I said, okay, Google, answer me this. Do laws reduce abortion? And if you're reading those, hopefully you can see them. Making abortions illegal does not reduce number of women having abortions. Abortion rates go down when countries make it legal. Report NBC News. Do state-level anti-abortion laws reduce abortion rates? New study. Anti-abortion laws don't reduce abortion rates. And I'm going, what? My worldview is completely shocked and shattered. Google, and seriously though, I actually did have a moment. Genuinely, when I started Googling this, and my trust of Google, because every time I drive somewhere, I always Google, direct me, and it's good, you know. So I trusted Google, and I got a little bit nervous. So I started digging into it, and here's just a list of examples. Just throwing this out, that these are recent articles, okay? Every one of these articles is a mainstream news source that is essentially making that argument. So NBC News, CNN, The Guardian, The Independent over in the UK, The Economist. So all fairly recent mainstream articles. I was definitely, when I looked these up, this was in, would have been around August 2018, so these would have been very recent. And so here's what I started finding. As I read through the articles, countries with the most restrictive abortion laws also have the highest rates of abortion. The study by the Guttmacher Institute found. In countries with the fewest restrictions, only 1% of abortions were the least safe kind from 2010 to 2014. That number jumps to 31% in the most restricted countries, according to the report released Tuesday by the Guttmacher Institute. Guess what the next thing is going to show? What? That's the takeaway from a new report from the Guttmacher Institute, which looks at abortion around the world. So right off the bat, I'm going, man, this is not a particularly wide range of studies, right? The limited sources aspect of it. So we're looking at it, and we're going, okay, well, first off, okay, no judgments, let's look into it. It sounds legit. Guttmacher is exactly what I would name a character if I was writing a novel with a crazy scientist that was doing studies all the time. Perfect, let's dig into it. What is the Guttmacher Institute? Boom, anybody know? I know some of you know. Yes, go for it.
Formerly the research arm of Planned Parenthood, and now just basically unofficially the research arm of Planned Parenthood.
Fair, yeah. So, what I would say, anyone who kind of doubts this, feel free to actually go to the Guttmacher Institute website. Feel free to Wikipedia it is up there. The Guttmacher Institute is a research and policy organization committed to advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights in the United States and globally. That is pulled right from their About page as their, just the top of it. It's not the mission statement, it's just the top. The group was founded as an arm of Planned Parenthood, but now operates independently, though it has frequently received financial support from Planned Parenthood. So a little bit more on it. Okay, yeah, this is, oh wait, listen. Yeah, this is a little cut off of their About page. I just thought it was interesting, their vision. And this actually correlates really nicely with what you were saying about openly interested. So their vision, this is too small, but I'll read it out loud. A world in which all people are able to exercise their rights and responsibilities regarding sexual behavior and reproduction freely and with dignity. Their values, their work. So one of the things that really interested me is it's beneath it. You can, again, scroll down on the, explore their page. They actually have a strategy. They talk about their strategy. Now, I don't know about you, but it's not like a research strategy, but like their strategy for moving forward with their agenda. And I work a lot with an organization called the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, which is an anti-abortion organization that has a strategy. Okay, so in my mind, when I hear strategy, I'm not thinking about research studies, about neutral, unbiased research studies. I'm thinking about you have a goal in mind and you're trying to further that goal. Okay, and so they're quite explicit about that. So, Alan Guttmacher, he was the second president of Planned Parenthood. Now the reason I say this is because the Guttmacher Institute is named after him. It was initially called the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which was changed sometime in the 90s. And I'll show you a little bit more of that in a bit. I want to show you a video because history is something that, let me see if I can do this. History is something I find really interesting. And so I found this video, which is a pretty late one, is it now? 1964, I'm going to say it's a 1964, something like that, interview with Alan Guttmacher.
Dr. Guttmacher, you're president of World Population Planned Parenthood. Tell me, what does it mean, Planned Parenthood?
Planned Parenthood is relatively simple to define. It is a movement which tries to make each child a wanted child born to responsible parents. This is only possible if the parents plan their parenthood. Now, we haven't attained the goal, but certainly it's one I think everyone would agree with.
Well, here in the United States, we're aware of a good many clinics in operation trying to assist members of the community in planning their families, just as you've been describing. But we're also aware that throughout the world there is a population crisis. How does Planned Parenthood fit in as an attempt to correct that, or where are we in terms of the population crisis?
Well, the United States is one of 54 countries belonging to International Planned Parenthood. This is the global organization that is based in England. I happen to be chairman of their medical committee, and I travel the world because of this. Now, I think everyone is conscious of the fact that in some areas of the world there is an explosive type of population increase, unsupportable in that it is outdistancing food, it retards economic development, it makes education impossible for the total numbers, and what we're attempting to do, of course, is to encourage countries to curtail the rate of growth. It has succeeded in some measure in such countries as South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. We're not making much progress in many areas. We're having difficulties, of course. The world is, as far as mainland China is concerned, the greatest country of the world in numbers. India, the second largest country, Pakistan, Egypt, and so forth. But certainly the effort must be made. Now, I've been in this a very long time, and I am encouraged because we have governments becoming deeply involved each year. One or more, many governments make population control part of national policy.
All right. So, I actually found that really interesting the first time I saw that, for a handful of reasons. Actually, somebody do me a favor, pull up on your cell phone YouTube and just type in Alan Guttmacher interview. Yeah, do you want it? Yeah, thank you. Alan Guttmacher interview. I just want to know the exact date. I'm pretty sure it's 1964, but can you help me out with that one? So, did anything stand out from that for you guys? Not just about bias, but just anything in general. It's a really interesting video. Yeah, go for it.
Population over population size of the
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, that he's. I don't know if you guys. I heard there was some kind of debate earlier about overpopulation today. Is that accurate? Anybody go?
I actually didn't know.
Anyways, there was a thing.
It happened, I wasn't there though.
It's so fascinating to me that this is a fairly old video. Did you get it?
Yeah, 1968.
1968. Shoot. So fairly old video, and already they're talking about overpopulation, and the way he's talking about it. Many governments are now making population control a part of their mandate. I just thought it was really interesting because it's from a different time where I guess that was still an okay way to talk about it. I think oftentimes we talk about it with a little bit more soft gloves, if that makes sense, Just really interesting. Yeah, so anyways, that's Alan Guttmacher, second president of Planned Parenthood. And so I started thinking, after looking into the Guttmacher Institute, named after Alan Guttmacher, all of that, okay, so is the study, that was my next question, okay, is it fair to say at this point, right, we've noticed some openly interested bias. It kind of clicked for me that there was something going on when every single news article I looked at cited the Guttmacher Institute, and you will find that, guaranteed. Almost anything you look at, through Google, on abortion, Guttmacher Institute will come up. Just remember that in your name next time you try to do that. So that'll happen. Trying to hide connections. This is actually really interesting. I'm going to briefly talk about that for a second. Just black that out. Trying to hide the connections. What's really interesting is it's now called the Guttmacher Institute, and like I said, it was called the Alan Guttmacher Institute. In the 90s, they cut that name off, right? Again, why would that? Is that them trying to hide their connection to Planned Parenthood? I think it is. You know, sure, you can, maybe there's some other reason, but again, there's a very real move away from that. Because if you call it the Alan Guttmacher Institute and people know and recognize that name, then it's obvious. If you cut off Alan, right, go to the Guttmacher Institute, again, the first time I heard that, I thought, what a scientific sounding organization. I had no idea that this organization was in any way connected to Planned Parenthood. And honestly, I think most people do not know. So funding, well, and that's a given, the funding from Planned Parenthood. So, is the study legit? So what I noticed is that Gilda Sedge kept coming up. There's one other name. They tend to be the two lead researchers on abortion-related type things. So okay, let's look into Gilda Sedge a little bit. This was her CV, and this was what was interesting here is that you can see here she worked for the Alan Guttmacher Institute up until '96, and then when she returned to the Guttmacher Institute, it was no longer the Alan Guttmacher Institute in 2003. So you can see that in between there, the institute actually changed its name. She recognized that. The other thing too is she has a very varied, her BA is in French up there, but what's it, minor in French and international relations, but you can see that at one point in her academic career, she really started going down this population control, abortion, that is now her thing. If you keep, this is publicly available by the way, so, you know, like, feel free to, if you're interested in who a researcher is on one of these documents, you can look at them and find out what kind of documents have they been posting their whole life, what kind of work have they been doing. And it is very, I would say, single-mindedly, in her defense, there's some really good stuff in there on women's health as well, but it's very single-mindedly around women's health plus the issue of abortion, almost every one of her works. So this was really interesting, is she is the one that's responsible for essentially, it's an annual report that you'll see coming up time and time again, and it's global abortion statistics. Essentially what I would say is in the modern world, and this sounds like a crazy claim, I'm telling you it's not. In the modern world, so in today, in the post-2000s, anything that we have on global abortion numbers goes back to her work. She's the top researcher on that, and it's always this under a name of, a repeating name that goes like global abortion estimates, global abortion estimates between the years 1995 and 2003, between 2005 and 2012, between 2014 and whatever, right? So there's tons of these, and they keep coming out over and over again. She's been looking at these trends for the last 20-something years, okay? And that's the thing, is it's the thing that she's doing with these trends is every time, if you read through their studies, it's always, the world needs more access to abortion for health reasons. Okay, so that's the claim, and I was, okay, well, let's look into this. Is there an opposite position to this? Is there another position to this? What are her studies even like? So I'm gonna save you some of that struggle, because the studies are really dry, but here we go. This was her conclusion. This is pulled right out of a study, one of those exact studies. Okay, so this is what she says in her conclusion. Although an induced abortion is a medically safe procedure when done in accordance with recommended guidelines, many women undergo unsafe abortions that put them at risk of physical harm. It is estimated that 6 to 9 million women in the developing world were treated for complications from unsafe abortion in 2012, and as many as 40% of women who needed care do not obtain it. Estimates of the proportion of abortions that are unsafe, ideally with a gradation by severity of risk associated with the procedure, will help to bring attention to the magnitude of this public health problem and the need for policies and programs to help reduce the incidence and consequences of unsafe abortions. This is honestly, it's throughout her work. That's the key, that's the point. Now, okay, yeah, of course, we don't want women dying. Let's dig into this a little bit more. Enter Dr. Elard Koch. So this was really interesting because, let me just put it this way. I read through her thing, before I move on to Dr. Elard actually, what I found in reading her studies, really briefly, was that a lot of them, right, in a lot of countries where abortion is not legal, they do not have the documentation on how many abortions are happening. So how are they making these estimates? That was a big question that came up. How are you estimating how many abortions happen in a country where it's underground and illegal? And essentially, to summarize it really quickly, a lot of it was done through a sort of survey system where they would present surveys to people working in hospitals. I don't know what the contents of these surveys, but then based off of that, they would extrapolate onto the rest of the country. So it was a very, it's an effort. Like they're making an effort to estimate these numbers, okay? And Albert Koch here, he starts getting kind of upset because he is a Chilean. I don't know if I said that right. He's any Chileans in the room? He is a Chilean embryologist, okay? And so he's been actively fighting, essentially against abortion and correcting anything that he found wrong in studies. And this was one of those things that he picked out. So he points out in a lot of his work that South American countries are being wrongfully smeared as having a great many deaths due to illegal abortions. And specifically, he was talking about Chile. It was a really big one for him. And that citation up there, really interesting bit there was that, Ethica Politica, that was the website that talks about it, but in The Guardian, there was an article talking about abortion rates skyrocketing in countries where it's illegal, specifically Chile, and he wrote back, and he made a correction to The Guardian, and if you go to that Guardian page today, on that news article it says at the bottom, a correction was made and pointed out by Dr. Attila Varszegi, yada yada, we've retracted that since then. And his argument, which was really interesting, his argument, which was really fascinating, was that, lock that for a second, that essentially there were almost no abortions happening in these countries, and that the women dying from that abortions, from illegal abortions, if it happened, would have been 1 or 2 women, almost negligible. Now, that sounds really callous. Obviously, every person who dies is a massive problem, but what he was pointing out was that there was this use of, the rates have increased or decreased, and pointing out that, okay, well, you can use that language of rates increasing and decreasing, but that's not actually going to help. His case was that if you want to help reduce maternal mortality, here's the major issues. And so he actually looks at it in his research. Now, one of the things, and I'll show you that here. This is, okay, we'll jump back to that. But this was causes of maternal mortality. So in his research, and this is from his article. So he looks at maternal mortality, breakdown in Mexico in 2009, number of total deaths, 1207, and Chile 2009, number of total deaths, 43. This is the breakdown of the reasons. So these would all be legal, right? These would be the ones that are recorded deaths. Well, almost all would be legal. I'll show you on abortion, there is a breakdown for the ones that he says are probably the illegal abortions, but these are the ones that are recorded, right? So your death certificate, what does it say? And causes of maternal mortality, here is the breakdown. So you're seeing hemorrhage, hypertension and eclampsia, sepsis. Other causes was, this one was interesting. I know on this one here, other abortion, other causes would actually fit into violence related. This was something that really surprised me, and this is a whole different avenue, sidetrack, but really interesting point. When they look at pregnancy related death, there's been quite a few studies on an increased rate of death after abortion, presumably from the guy murdering the woman, or things like that. Even from some of them were getting in a car accident or something like that. So there's other aspects that are like the woman has just given birth, but she's or not given birth, and more likely or less likely to die. One of those reasons that I looked at in the study was a woman who has given birth to a child. There's a protection element to that, which is essentially that if you've given birth to a child, you stay home with the child, you actually end up doing less dangerous activities. So you're less likely to get into a fatal car accident because you're not leaving your house. Super weird. It gets pretty interesting. So there's lots of other stuff on there. Anyways, what we end up looking at here is that you come down here, abortion, 3%, okay? Here, out of 43 deaths, abortion, 2.3%. Now you'll see another breakdown. Spontaneous and induced. Anybody familiar with that? Who knows what, okay, so what is spontaneous abortion?
Miscarriage.
Miscarriage, exactly. So I didn't know this when I first looked into this, but that's kind of, I thought it was sneaky. I'm gonna be very honest, I thought it was sneaky because we talk about abortion and then we include miscarriage in that. And whenever we talk about the politically charged abortion, nobody is debating about miscarriage. Nobody's saying, miscarriage should be legal. Nobody ever says that. We're talking about induced abortion. So in the academic, scientific, medical community, and I've had nurses kind of say this to me on the street when I was talking about abortion and whatnot. That's exactly what they'll say is, well, what kind of abortion are we talking about here? And I'm like, oh, induced. We're talking about induced abortion, not spontaneous. So let's break this further down. But just for the record, I don't know if anyone's really good at math. What's 3% of 1207? Okay, 160. Sure, I'll take it. It's just throwing something out there for you guys to do.
I was just wondering how this, I can't remember his name now, the embryologist got such a vastly different number from the other ones, and how he even got this number in the first place.
Yeah.
You know,
So-
you said it's so hard.
So we'll get to that, yeah, and it's really, yeah, that's gonna be the next bit. But essentially, I think these would have been from the deaths that were, again, like I said, the legal ones. So they're not, these are not being, what do you call that when you just assume something or try to, well, anyways, you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah, okay, so here's how he breaks it down. So this is the 3%, and I think this is just looking at Mexico. So we're looking at this 3% bracket. Mind you, it's 2002 or 2008. That's fine. The point is, this is the breakdown of out of all maternal mortality deaths in a year in Mexico. This is the amount that fall under the abortion category. So this was what I talked about. Is other abortion. He specifically talks about 005 is violence related. So that was the. He actually goes so far as to say the reason that there's a jump in 2002 to 2008 in other abortion is probably not because of illegal abortions, but because of an increase in violent crime from 25% to 33% in Mexico between those years. Again, pointing out that this is essentially a woman who's had an abortion whose husband or lover, as a consequence, kills her, which is insane. But that's on there. Wow. Unspecified abortion. This is the part where he says this is most likely the part that falls under illegal abortions. So, medical abortion, this refers to you're in the hospital, they're saying we need to do something for your life, boom, we're going to give you a medical abortion. So tiny percentage, but even that, 37.1%. Okay, 97 deaths. That's a significant amount, I suppose. You know, you look at that and you say, sure, that's 30 something, right? Maybe 40. That's 40 women. That's a tragedy. Again, though, and this ends up being his main argument, is if you want to reduce this number, reducing this is not going to make as much of an impact as you have been saying. It would be far more, and this actually becomes his conclusion, it would be far more effective to focus on this and all these other things. So that's in Mexico, and you can see again here, so 29.5 out of 78 deaths. So this sounds pretty bad to say, but a relatively few number of deaths due to illegal abortion in Mexico, according to what his numbers are showing here. Abortion-related deaths in Mexico, yeah. Now, let's jump back to this. Yeah. Now this explains why we're having such a weird situation with the what is the word? I can't believe I forgot. The discrepancy between the estimates. Thank you. Yes. Estimates. So why are the studies by the Guttmacher Institute showing massive estimates? And this is, he talks about it. This is in his essay. It goes down to when he talks about estimates, where do they get their numbers from? I'll just read it out. Let me know if I'm going too fast. Methodological problems can be illustrated when comparing indirect abortion estimates based on opinion surveys and comparing it to actual abortion figures in the Federal District of Mexico. Back up. You need more information. There's so much information. This is complicated. So, in the District of Mexico, what happened in 2007 is basically this is the province of Mexico that Mexico City is in. They made abortion legal. The rest of Mexico, rural Mexico, all the other provinces, states, I don't know what they call them, that's the idea, did not. So it is illegal in those provinces, but it is legal in Mexico province. Let's say Mexico City province. The only Mexican state where elective abortion is legal since April 24th, 2007. This is interesting. This becomes a really interesting natural study that he refers to. For 2006, using a combination of in-hospital statistics and opinion surveys, that's what I mentioned earlier, right? That's how the Guttmacher Institute does their study. Juarez et al. Estimated between 725,000 and 1 million induced abortions for the whole country of Mexico, and this is the interesting part, and between 137,000 and essentially 200,000 induced abortions for Mexico City province. Nevertheless, the total number of elective induced abortions registered the year after making abortions legal in this Mexican state was 10,137. Okay, what did I just say? So, in 2006, the estimate, we see their estimate, this is the Guttmacher estimate for 2006, is 137,000 to 200,000 illegal abortions. The following year, abortions are not illegal anymore. The actual number, at this point, it's imagine that you're in, whatever, you're recording all the abortions, all the medical abortions that are happening. The actual number of abortions that we have access to now through official documentation by the government is 10,000. So, the question then becomes, what happened to the other annual 137? Because it's not like that was just the 1 year. That's their general, the general trend year by year by year. So once it's legal, you're telling me that, at a best estimate, 127,000 women decided to continue going with illegal abortions as opposed to hospital ones. I'm not saying that's not possible. Genuinely, like there probably would be a small number of women that would, because maybe that's the way they've always done it. That is a really big difference, though, and that's what he points out. So he says, in fact, the figure of legally induced abortions carried out in the 5 cumulative years, that means counting the abortions every single year and adding them up, from April 2007 until April 2012, in brackets here, a period of time probably long enough to replace illegal abortion with legal procedures in Mexico. So he acknowledges, that's him acknowledging that it's possible that it takes some time for this to kick in, that not everyone is going to go straight to the legal abortions. That number in 5 years combined was 78,544, which is nearly 50% of the original estimate by the authors for only a single year. Okay, so that is a really interesting case study, I would say, giving a little bit more of a concrete example of, okay, have the Guttmacher Institute been overestimating? It's very clear, just from the get-go, that obviously it's in their best interest, you could say, it's in their interest to overestimate, but do we have any evidence that they would do such a thing? That maybe they've made some mistakes in their means of gathering that data, in their way of, I'm just going to have to get that word written up on the back wall there, in the way of estimating, yes, estimating the data. And so this, I would say, is a really concrete example of that. We do have more, though. Oh, there's another interesting piece. So we'll move on from here. Yeah. This was his conclusion, though. I won't read this out to you. It is necessary to emphasize that approximately 98% of maternal deaths, and this is referring to Mexico, are related to causes other than illegal induced abortion in Mexico. Therefore, only marginal or practically null effects would be expected from abortion legalization or abortion prohibition on overall maternal mortality rates in this Latin American country. As recently shown in a natural experiment conducted in Chile, finally considering the current profile of Mexican maternal mortality, it can be hypothesized that maternal health in this country would greatly benefit from public health policies directed to provide adequate medical treatment of conditions such as hemorrhage, gestational hypertension, eclampsia, and indirect causes of maternal death, mainly characterized by pre-existing chronic diseases. Okay, so the people who are dying during an abortion procedure, he's saying, well, the death itself is not because of the abortion procedure, but because the person is going into the abortion procedure with illness. Now, so that's an interesting discussion, but we can go back to that later. But the point, as you can see, is just back to this. He's saying, let's focus on this, you guys. And this becomes a theme throughout. Okay, as we go forward and look at this, when we try to answer the question, is maternal mortality directly related to abortion? This becomes really clear that this is kind of the best, most effective way to tackle that. So, let's stop briefly for a second here. Go back. Any questions? Yeah. How are we doing? Lot of big number crunching, crazy details. Any questions on anything? Okay. Just want to make sure. So, problems at the Guttmacher Institute. vague language. This is something he talks about more explicitly in his article. Reproductive health refers to both good health care and abortion access. So he agrees that good reproductive health is important, good access to that. And by that he means you need to have the medical care, that if you're giving birth to a child, if you're in that situation, that you need to have access to the medicines, the doctors, to all these things to help you with your eclampsia, insert, all these other complicated medical things, right? Where the disagreement happens is abortion access. And he's been tackling that, but just, again, we're mixing the language, so this often gets mixed. Another thing, induced abortion versus spontaneous abortion. We've already talked about this, but you can see how if you're mixing, right, if you just call it abortions, and we're talking about number of abortions and whatnot, and some studies include miscarriage in that, and some studies don't, well, now we're having, again, vague language is going to cause misleading information, misleading conclusions from it. So, unsafe versus safe abortions. Is that arbitrary? It's actually quite interesting. I believe what they're going off of is a United Nations definition of safe abortions. You can actually look at it. They have a guidebook on it. So, is it arbitrary in the sense that whoever's coming up with it, like why are we making these the guidelines for is it safe or not safe? For the most part, a lot of the information on there is around, within the actual thing itself, it's around, are they getting people to talk to before and after their pregnancy? That said, though, it does include, are they being told, abortion? So what I'm trying to say here is that even within the idea of safe versus unsafe abortion, by its very definition, they include the idea of, well, are they being told that they have access to an abortion? Is everything being made accessible to them? So that's something that even without knowing that, it looks at knowledge whether you know that or not. The question is, okay, well, who decides what is unsafe and what is safe? How are those guidelines being set? That's an important issue as well. Now, this was the big one. They'll use percentage of deaths instead of raw numbers. So that's exactly what he gets at. Is you throw out in the study there that was done in the one that he corrected, you throw out numbers like, oh, well, the percentages have skyrocketed, and you're talking about 4 to 8 or 12 to 24, relatively very small numbers. So whenever you use percentages instead of raw numbers, you're running that risk. And then, of course, the numbers are all based on estimates and bias-prone models, not actually hard statistics resulting in inflated numbers. That's that whole business of, okay, we should look at how they're doing their actual estimations, because if that Mexico thing happens, and if that happens again and again, for now, that's the one that we can look at. But if that happens again in more cases, we should be looking at that critically, no matter where we stand, and saying, are your estimates actually checking out once we see the legal paperwork the following years? Okay, so this kind of explains the business of percentages. This is for you guys to laugh. So feel free. Oh, okay, something to finish. Yeah, so basically, fastest growing is such a dubious claim. It's true, we grow by 85% over the past year. And he says, hey Rob, want to join my religion? Rob says, sure, whatever. He says, ha, my religion just grew by 100% this year. He says, we have 38,000 members. It's like, hope they're all okay with second place. Again, pointing out that exact same discrepancy, right? Is 1 to 2 is 100% growth. So you have to be careful when you're playing with percentages. Okay, abortion rate. Oh, cool, get ready, buckle in. This is where I get kind of passionate. I don't know, this other stuff I was like, but now I'm gonna get pumped up because this irks me significantly. Abortion rate. What is the abortion rate? It's that. It's the number of abortions per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 to 49. Some studies also use number of abortions per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 to 39. What does that mean? Okay, so we have a country, okay? The abortion rate of that country is how many abortions, so this is a yearly thing, it's a yearly rate, which means that based on basic biology that, pretty sure that's how it works, that you're not really going to get pregnant more than once a year, hopefully. I guess you maybe could, and that's not attributed, but that could be a problem if that happens. Is that possible? Help me out here, guys.
If you get enough abortions.
If you get enough abortions.
You just keep getting pregnant, right?
I mean, Irish twins are a thing as well.
Right, true, twins. Oh man. What are Irish twins?
It's when you have like two kids like a year or less apart from
Yeah.
each other.
Oh, so like 9 months and then.
Like if
Yeah.
like I had a friend who got like pregnant again a couple months postpartum, so her two kids are like very close in age, so that's called Irish twins.
Okay. So there you go. These are legit.
More or less.
Fair. These are actually things that I didn't even consider. Which is, again, this is why statistics are so crazy, because there's so much that you have to try and consider to make it legit. Anyways, this is an annual number. It's the annual abortion rate. So they'll say the abortion rate for Canada in the year 2014, in the year 2015. Okay? They total up all the abortions. They total up all the women between the ages of this number, whether they are pregnant or not, in case you were wondering. It has nothing to do with whether they're pregnant. They just total that number up, and then they get you a nice little rate. So, you know, what that means is if you had 100 abortions and there were 1,000 women, that rate would be 100. Okay, the reason I put this on there too, because this was just something interesting that I found when I realized that there was another study that had it 15 to 39. I thought, well, what difference does that make? Question to you guys, what happens to the abortion rate? Well, this number, what happens to this number if we bump this age?
Goes up.
Yeah, well, I think it would go down. It would go down, yes. Why would it go down?
Well, because you're adding women, but you're not really adding abortions.
Right, exactly. Why aren't you adding abortions?
Well, because most women between the ages of 39 and 49 are not getting abortions.
Exactly, yeah. So that was just another really interesting tidbit that I noticed that, again, this is, what I'm trying to, real quick, my goal with this is to try and get you guys to go through that same crazy train that I went through trying to figure out how malleable statistics are and how these things impact it. So that was really interesting to me. Yeah, they admit it as well in their own studies that most abortions happen at a really young age. So yes, if you're adding that age bracket and counting more women, but overall they have not been having more abortions, that rate is going to go down further. So even just what this number is going to modify your abortion rate significantly at times. Now, this comes straight out of the Guttmacher Institute. I didn't just Photoshop it on there, I'm serious, you can find this. This is their number one, like Google Guttmacher Institute abortion study. This will come up, scroll down. Okay, abortion rates range somewhat narrowly in countries with complete official statistics and widely in countries with indirect estimates. Huh, you don't say. Now, you're laughing, it took me a while to figure this one out, but I'm just going to throw this out there. We've just been going over, we've looked at another scientist who said, look, you are overestimating, here is evidence, look at Mexico City District. Widely, like, my point is that even they are pointing it out, countries with complete official statistics. So, we have official documents versus the ones that we estimated. All the ones that we estimated are higher. Now, they actually use this to make the case that third world countries are having a ton of abortions. And so the argument in this article, the argument in this study, is that even though first world countries have the most open abortion policies, the most legally liberal ones, I guess you could say, they actually have less abortions. They're saying, look, the abortion rate, look at the abortion rate. So let's talk about that. Other than, okay, so this, we've already established that we think that there's a pretty decent chance that these are overestimated. But let's actually look and dig into the abortion rate. One of my friends posted a Facebook post the other day. I didn't sleep because I was busy replying all night. I'm that kind of person. It's terrible. Don't be me. And it was basically, the Netherlands has the lowest abortion rate, and yet they have all these policies in place, you know, kind of like, the implied thing from this message was, look at this evidence, why are you pro-lifers being dumb and opposing these things which reduce the abortion rate? Now, I was upset by this, because as I've been looking into abortion rate, this is my key argument, a lower abortion rate does not equal fewer abortions. Okay? Let's take a look at that. This is I'm going to give you my theoretical ones just to demonstrate it with easy math, and then I'll show you real countries to demonstrate it using that graph, using their information. So, abortions per 1,000 women. Country 1. 1,000 women live in this country between the ages of 15 to 49. There are 10 abortions in this year. The abortion rate, therefore, is 10. We're all following? Boom. Country 2. 10,000 women between the ages of 15 to 49. 50 abortions happen. the abortion rate, because there are 10,000 women in this country, is 5. Does that make sense? So again, the abortion rate is per 1,000 women, right? So even though there are 50 abortions happening, when you do that whole shindig, right, when you cut the 0 off, you have to cut the 0 off here too, and you end up getting 5. That's the thing, right? So, okay, lower abortion rate, more abortions, far more abortions, right? Because of population. So this is one of my key things. One of the things that modifies abortion rate, one of the reasons that abortion rate doesn't tell us whether a country has fewer or more abortions on its own, is because you need to know the population. And so when it comes to this, when we're comparing countries with, do they all have the same population? Of course not. Of course they don't have the same population. No. When you're comparing wildly different populated countries and you're showing me an abortion rate, well, that doesn't tell me very much about that, does it? It doesn't tell me how many abortions are happening. So when you make an argument to me on your Facebook feed at 3 a.m., I'm going to have to stay up all night now because I'm going, no. Like, yeah, Netherlands has a low abortion rate, but that doesn't tell me how many abortions are happening. Okay, we'll move on. Country 3 and country 4. There you go. So they both have 10,000 women this time. This one, 1,000 women get pregnant, and this one, 100 women get pregnant. So here's the interesting thing. You'll notice, yeah, I know, right? They both have the same abortion rate, right? So nothing else has changed, just the amount of women getting pregnant. Now, granted, this doesn't actually make a difference for the number of abortions, but it tells a different story. And that's the reason I included this book, because this was another thing that I thought of is, well, we don't know how many women are getting pregnant. Isn't that a more interesting statistic? Not everyone's going to agree with me on this one, but I do think it is, because that tells a wildly different story to me about, I don't know, math, it's hard, 5% versus 50%, right? So the way that I look at this, and I'm going to admit right here, that's my own little bias, so you don't have to look at it this way because the raw number of abortions is the same. But the way I look at this is if a woman gets pregnant in that country, this is the % chance that their child is going to not be aborted versus the other country. So they tell wildly different stories. And that's not included in the abortion rate. The abortion rate doesn't tell you that. And also, I mean, obviously, yeah, so wildly different stories. This is the key thing though, right here, this top one is the biggest thing, is that because of population differences, lower abortion rate doesn't mean fewer abortions. So, let's look at some real world examples. Boom! Netherlands, where are we? Right here. I use Netherlands because that's the one that the guy used. So, Netherlands, abortion rate 8. Hungary, I'm Hungarian, so I was like, oh, let's look at my home country. Tragic. Hungary has an abortion rate of 14. Now, I use, this is my site up here, Johnston Archive. You can Google it. It provides really good, not really good. What I'm trying to say is it has all of them. It's like it has a ton of countries on there, and it lists. You'll see it. I actually have a screenshot of it. You'll see it. But the point is, in 2014, 30,000 abortions. In 2014, 32,000 abortions. Right. Okay. So, 8 to 14, almost double the abortion rate in Hungary, and yet almost the same amount of abortions. Why is that? You guessed it. Boom, population difference. That makes a difference. So this is my real world example of country 1 and country 2. Okay, let's look at another one. This one's crazy. The United States in 2014 had 652,639 abortions. You can look that up on Wikipedia. There's an organization in the United States that lists all of their abortions for a long, long time, ever since it's been legalized. One of the things about it is it was probably at least 200,000 higher than that, because by this point several states were no longer reporting their abortions. I think it had gone down from 52 to 49, may have been 48. Point is, this is a big number, okay? The United States has an abortion rate, as you can see, of 13 on this list. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you this. It's kind of crazy. The United States has more abortions than, I haven't done the math precisely, but probably almost more abortions than every single one of these countries combined. So most of the smaller European countries range between 30,000 and 60,000 abortions. The biggest ones are France and England, with about 200,000 and 160,000 abortions in that year. The point is, if you add up the literal raw number of abortions from all of these countries, you're still probably just barely scraping the actual number of abortions happening in the United States of America. Why? Massive population. Guys, what's the population of the United States of America?
350 million.
300 million, that's huge. What? Crazy. Yeah, and here's the thing. Now, I was arguing against an acquaintance, and he was all like, yeah, it proves my point because they have a lower abortion rate and fewer abortions. Yes, exactly, yes. So everything that's above the United States, everything above here with a lower abortion rate will have fewer abortions. As I said, every single country on this list has fewer abortions than the United States of America. But my point is that every country above the United States will also have fewer abortions. So what that ends up meaning is that, you look at that and you go, it's independent. That's kind of my argument that I was trying to make, is abortion rate does not necessarily tell us that fewer abortions are happening. And why is this important? Google anything on abortion. Nobody talks about raw abortion numbers. Try to find raw abortion numbers. It's not that easy. Because the case is that we can make an argument and say, well, look, they have a lower abortion rate, and therefore that's what we want. Don't we want a lower abortion rate? That's the thing. Do we want a lower abortion rate? And so I would make the argument that abortion rate is misleading. And I honestly think it's knowingly misleading because it makes it seem like fewer abortions are happening. That's what I thought. Maybe I'm just dumb, maybe y'all knew that that's not what it meant, but when I dug into it, I was like, well, you're trying to make me think that I want a lower abortion rate because that means fewer abortions, but that's not even literally the case. It's just a stat that you can easily twiddle around by bumping the age range of women or by the populations of the countries varying, and you're comparing apples to oranges because the United States has 300 million and these other countries like Hungary has 9.5 million, so how do we even compare that? So, there we go. Maternal mortality rate. Let's move on. Boom. Questions, briefly. I can't, yes?
Do we have the data on pregnancy rates in either developed countries or undeveloped nations? Because that's a stat that I'm interested in,
Yeah.
the pregnancy rate, because I'm assuming with contraceptive,
The
pregnancy rate would be much lower in the United States than, say, Uganda. And that
we generally do, and that one is called the abortion ratio. Generally, that's how it gets. This is another, wow, abortion rate versus abortion ratio, and it's not a math. Well, I guess it is in that sense, and it.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, it seems like if there is going to be some sort of like abortion rate number, it seems like, yeah, that sort of ratio is much more like informative.
Yes.
Because if you're just taking, yeah, like kind of the whole population of women, like regardless of pregnancy status or not,
Yeah.
right, that, like you showed with kind of the countries 3 and 4 there, that really changes like the actual, like how many women who get pregnant have abortions, whereas I think that's a much more useful number in most circumstances versus how many women out of the total category of women had abortions.
And so that's the abortion ratio, and that means ratio as opposed to rate is one thing compared to another. So if the abortion ratio in a country is 50, the abortion ratio is also to 1,000, but it's to 1,000 live births. So that means that for every 1,000 babies that are born, there are 50 babies that are aborted, which I forget what the exact numbers are, but anyways, the point is that you then use that to come up with a percentage of, you could then make a case based off the abortion ratio that X% of pregnancies end in abortion. Or I guess you could say X% of, again, even there it's more complicated. Like it gets so messier because you're seeing already, hopefully, that you're thinking, okay, well, what about miscarriages? What about this, that, and the other? So that's not even, right, because it's live births versus abortions, and you don't necessarily know if that abortion would have been a miscarriage or not. That information is missing. Okay, cool. Maternal mortality rate. Boom. Okay, this is where your paper's coming. Now, this is important. See this line here? If it's not very visible, but please remember that line. Basically, 5 to 6. What does it mean? This comes from an article citing a pro-choice organization, just giving their breakdown of the legal status of abortion by country. So, how does this work? You can see up here, developed regions, right? Goes like this. Are you seeing that? Developed regions. Versus developing regions. Goes like that. That's all the rest of it. Left to right. Top to bottom. Top, most restrictive abortion laws. Bottom, Canada. You can have abortion for as long, whenever you want, for whatever reason you want. Make sense? So these are essentially no restrictions as to reason with gestational and other requirements. So that they don't actually go as so far as to say that like no restrictions. I believe that is Canada, maybe North Korea and China. I've heard that tossed around, but there's very few.
I've heard North Korea has outlawed some abortions, so they're better than us.
Okay, so
China too.
so-
China's the one.
Canada's the only one left. Okay, so it doesn't go to break it down quite that far, but the point is that there's a lot of countries with very few limits. Okay, now here's what I thought looking at this: maternal mortality. Again, this was what maternal mortality means: number of deaths per 100,000 live births. So this is I'm pretty sure, is it rate? Oh gosh.
This is ratio.
This is ratio, I think it's ratio.
Yeah, live births to deaths.
Or would it be, yeah, that's what I think. The point is, it's generally a very small number, but it means for every 100,000 pregnant women who go through their pregnancy and are okay at the end of it, and then even that is defined as like surviving the next X amount of weeks. This is how many deaths there are. Most of the first world countries, there we go. Yeah, so most of the first world countries, that's a pretty low number. Don't panic. It's scary. I'm totally serious about this though, by the way. It is kind of scary. I've had friends who studied into maternal mortality rate and then they were freaking out when they were pregnant because they're going, oh my goodness, like there's an actual number to that. There is. Women still do actually die from birth. Birth can be a very dangerous thing, and that's why research like this, studies that are trying to go into this, is a good thing. We want to limit that as much as possible. Now, real quick, question for you guys. If access to abortion is very important for a lower maternal mortality rate, how would you expect the maternal mortality rate to be divided on this chart? Meaning that, yeah, okay, I think you already said it.
It would increase as you go up the chart.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so okay, so in case anyone didn't understand what I was saying, getting at here is that basically these countries should have the highest maternal mortality rate, and these countries should have the lowest maternal mortality rate, because of course they have free, open access to abortion. Is that the reality? How are we going to find out? What? Crazy. Well, here's how we're going to find out. We're going to look at the actual maternal mortality rates that are very publicly available. I can't even find this anymore. But you could find these exact same ones everywhere. Wikipedia has one. The point is this: the actual maternal mortality rates are actually really well tracked in most countries. It gets pretty crazy. The point is that look at these. So these are this is their place. So 3rd place, 4th place, 5th place, 6th place, 7th place. There's a lot of ties because the number is so low. Where's the number? Oh, you said is the number. Yeah, that's crazy. Sorry. Yeah. So the point is that that's their maternal mortality rate. That gets ridiculously high at the very top end of it. The top end of it is like there's 2 or 3 small African countries that have a maternal mortality rate in the thousands, which is insane to me. But this kind of fluctuates from the best ones under 10. I would say that's what happens. These are the best ones. These are the top countries for low maternal mortality rate are under 10. I don't think the first world goes anywhere above 40 or 50. I think is the kind of the threshold there. And then you have the 3rd world. Point is, why do I have these highlighted for you? Why do you think? I bet you know. Because they're countries with strict abortion laws. What? Oh my goodness, no, crazy. Ireland has strict abortion laws? Not anymore, sad. I was there, but here's the thing. This information is before any kind of legalization of abortion in Ireland. Ireland had some of the strictest abortion laws on the books for years and years and years. And Ireland had some of the lowest maternal mortality rate on the face of the planet. They have a really good healthcare system. Now that also goes on to Poland, United Arab Emirates, Malta, Libya, so a smattering of countries in there. Now, the point I want to get is that you can do this on your own. We are running lower on time, so we're not going to, but this is what I would invite you to do, is challenge that idea by then looking at this and finding the maternal mortality rate to actually be connected to this, to the top bottom versus the left and right. Because that's what I found, is that upon investigating this, and Deirdre, you can vouch for this, like I had the group do this and just pull random countries. Right? Like I was like, I'm pretty confident this is how it's going to work. Did it work?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Random countries. You pull random countries from the list, and what almost everybody found was that the higher maternal mortality rate was shocker in the developed world. And it goes back to exactly what Dr. Attila Varszegi said, which was if you want to reduce maternal mortality, you actually need good healthcare access. And that's not as related to abortion as some people would have us think, as some people are inclined to think. Yes.
So in Malta, what's the rate, the mortality rate?
9. 9. So these are all very low maternal mortality rates. That means 100,000 births, and depending on the size of it, again, obviously depending on the size of the country as well, like you're talking very few deaths in most of these countries.
And abortion is illegal in Malta?
I had it purple, so
It's prohibited altogether.
prohibited altogether. Perfect, yeah. There you go. And so here's another, I just a little side point. I'm going to get a little bit more biased on this one, but the reason that they're targeting Ireland, that they targeted Ireland, was because of this. 100%. I look at this and I go, yeah, of course. Ireland had been a beacon of resistance and an example. Because whenever anyone said, you didn't even have to go through all this crazy number crunching and research. You could just say, oh, really? Ireland it's illegal and they have one of the lowest maternal mortality rates on the face of the planet. So let's get rid of this list, and slowly that's what's happening. Even Mexico, I think, is a more recent one again, because why not? I mean, right? There's that little, like I showed you there with the District of Mexico, so they're going to try and legalize it in all of Mexico. Yes.
And is abortion legal in Italy?
It should be on there. Yeah. I couldn't tell you, but it's on the list.
Yeah, it's no restrictions.
No restrictions. There you go. Yeah. Most of them. That's the thing. Most of the first world countries, I'm going to put it this way, coincidentally, have low abortion rates. But what else do they also have? Great health care. Yes. So that's my point being, right, that the impact of access to abortion, based on the evidence before us with maternal mortality rate and with this, does not seem to be as important as certain people and certain groups like the UAlberta Institute would make it out to be. Because if it were, I would expect this to give us different results. Yes.
I just can't read it. What does Poland say?
Poland says 3.
3.
Per 100,000 births. And again, the other thing too is it's not per women, it's per births, right? Yeah. So that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Italy is legal?
Yeah, so I've highlighted the ones where it's heavily restricted or illegal, and those, but it goes up through the list. And so what you will find is, regardless of whether it's legal or illegal in the country, what really determines whether it's a high number or a low number is whether it's a very developed country or whether it's a developing country. So essentially, the better access to healthcare that a country has, the less the maternal mortality rate is, independent of what its law on abortion is. Boom. Do the laws affect number of abortions? We're almost done. This one's really easy. The answer is, spoiler alert, yes. No, let's go into it. So, United States, this is the Wikipedia page, you can tell. Boom, boom, fantastic. This is the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, records this in the United States. All right. Number of abortions reported to the CDC in 1970, 200,000, goes all the way up over the next 10 years to about 1.3 million, pardon me, keeps going. At right here, 1997 to 1998, you look at that and you say, oh, there's a difference. That's the year that some of the states stopped reporting their numbers. So there was a slight decrease, but even the Wikipedia article acknowledges this. They say that the CDC has acknowledged that the actual decrease was a far smaller percentage, most likely, because they didn't get the full reporting. But the point is that the numbers have actually gone down. Even accounting for that, the numbers have gone down by about, I'm going to say 200,000. And that has been largely attributed to a growth in at-home abortifacient, so personal abortifacient things where you're not going in to get an abortion. The pill, that sort of thing. But the point is that this is actually the general trend, is abortion is legalized, the number not slowly, but the number goes up over the next several years and then plateaus. Okay, so plateaued at about 1.3, 1 million. Other things impacted over time, but as a rule of thumb, you can tell where the laws change. Let's move on. Canada. This is that other site that I was telling you guys about, the Johnston Archive, which has all the historical data for several countries. So, looking at Canada, when is abortion made legal? Oh, by the way, it's very complicated. What you're looking at is this. These are the number of reported abortions. Brackets are actually their best guess for abortions that weren't documented. It's not really relevant to the first world countries. There's not a lot of that. That's more for the third world countries that he looks at. He cites his sources on that. I didn't really bother with that because I thought, let's not further focus on estimations. Let's see where we can get raw numbers. So, yeah, any major changes in Canadian history? Can you actually see the numbers? You might not.
I'm not wearing my glasses.
Oh, okay.
No.
If you can't see, so we have 1970, 11,200. This number kind of plateaus out at around 54,000, 64, 68, 70. Then it goes down 69, 70, 65,000, 65,000, 66, 67,000, 67,000, 70,000. Here in 1989, it goes 77,000, 91,000, and it plateaus increasingly up to about 100,000.
Yeah, because after 1988, that's when it would go up again.
And what happened in 1988?
They removed all the abortion restrictions, right? Because from 69 onward, there was abortion with restrictions.
Yes.
And then, from 88 onward, there was abortion without restrictions. So that seems to have added another several thousand.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is what I found, is that you don't need to know the dates that abortion legislation was passed, or either which way, it shows up in the statistics. So, another example, Poland, boom. When was abortion legalized in Poland? Well, 1955, 1,400, 18,900. Look, 1956 and 1957, it jumps 100,000, goes up, plateaus at around 220,000, 200,000. Okay, so historically, what would have happened there? I'm just going to go on. I didn't bother looking into it at the time, but I'm just going to go on a limb here and say it was the Soviet Union. Soviet Union numbers on abortion are absolutely insane. At one point, the highest abortion rate I think that the world has ever seen was Russia, with an 80% of pregnancies ending in abortion. I know, I made the same look, 80%. Think about that, 4 out of 5. You're pregnant, your baby's getting aborted. Why? Because the Soviet state wants you to abort it. You do it for the party. The Soviet Union used abortion as a population control tool. You can totally see years when it's completely outlawed, you're supposed to have children for the state, and years when it's 80%. Russia's insane, the Soviet Union's insane for that. Sorry, I just mean insane as in it's dramatic. It's a very dramatic shift as.
They are also insane.
Yeah. So, moving forward in Poland, boom, this is also Poland. Let's keep looking at the numbers. So, 1986, we've jumped a little bit, that's like 1977, 1986, but you see the numbers start going down. We're 129, 123, 108, 82, 59, 30, 11, 1,000, 800, really low, slightly increasing now down here. But my question would be, looking at these numbers, any guesses where there might have been legislation happening? What years? Again, sorry, it might be a little bit, I should have zoomed in more, but. So, 1988, 100,000. 1989, 82. Going to 60, 30, 11, 1,000.
Yeah, so over that span of years there.
Yeah, 89 was the fall of the Iron
What?
Curtain, so.
Amazing! Ooh, I love it, history. Yes.
I'm Polish, so I should know that.
Yeah. So here you go. And what happened in Poland? This is pulled straight from the Wikipedia page, by the way, on abortion in Poland. The most important change was that of 1990. After the end of communist rule, an ordinance of the 30th of April 1990 made access to abortion more difficult. A major change came in 1993 when the law was further tightened. Boom. 1990, as you said, 82,000 down to 60, down to 30, so over that 2-year span, the numbers really dramatically decreased. And then again, almost completely gone by 93. Yes?
Do you have an explanation for that 96 to 97 jump?
You know what, I don't. That's a good question. No, that would be a really interesting point.
Like, I almost wonder if it's a typo.
I don't think so.
Methodological change?
No, that's a really interesting point. You're right. That's the thing. That's where you gotta look in. So then check what.
It's just, it breaks the trend.
Yeah.
Poland had a really rough year then.
No, but actually, there probably is something. I'll be honest with you. If somebody pulls up the Wikipedia page, they might actually find it in the continuing paragraph. I was just pulling that enough to kind of make the point, but yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? So you look at the stats and you go, what happened there? And again, we're trying to be rational about this. We clearly recognize, well, that doesn't just happen on its own. Is that a reasonable answer to say, oh, it must have just been a rough year?
What years?
Sorry?
96 and 97.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, 96 and 97. Okay, so what did we learn? Woo, right again, love it. Guttmacher Institute is a research arm of Planned Parenthood with a pro-choice vision and strategy. By using vague language and inflated estimates, Planned Parenthood creates a false impression that lack of abortion access results in millions of deaths per year. A lower abortion rate does not necessarily indicate fewer abortions. This is the thing I want to stress the most. It is a statistic independent of raw abortion numbers, and also laws make a huge difference in raw abortion numbers. Yeah, we'll close it off with that. List of citations. I can email you these if you want.
I can send them out.
You can send them out, perfect. Yeah, I've tried to kind of going throughout just express where I got them from. All of this stuff is super accessible if you just dig into it. The heaviest material, if you really want to get into that, is the, and I'm saying like totally do it, is you've got the Guttmacher study and the Dr. Koch's study. Lots of Guttmacher studies available, really interesting stuff. Because again, they are saying their methods, and then Dr. Koch's study as well. So those are available. Yeah, questions. There should be some. Let's talk about questions. Are there any questions? Hey, John.
How much money does Canada spend on funding abortions?
I don't know.
Overseas?
No, I don't know. I've heard it's a
Oh, a lot. I've
big
heard
number.
it's a lot. I have no idea.
Justin Trudeau, I know, recently made a pledge.
Well, because, yeah, he virtue signaled by pledging away like $650 million to cover what the United States decided not to put towards it, and then add that to whatever we were paying before, and it's a little, atrocious.
Any questions about what we looked at? Okay, I want to kind of start a discussion, but I will say that I like all of this looked at, though there's still more research that obviously needs to be done. One of the major issues that I kind of have automatically with it is just for starters that statistics are really, I want to say they're pretty nebulous. As I think we've looked at, it gets tough. There's so many things included in it. Even just pointing out what you guys said, like, oh, well, you can have Irish, what is it, Irish twins? Somebody said that? Irish twins, yeah. Right? Like, there's so much that you're trying to consider in these, what impacts these statistics, that I'm sure that we don't have it right yet either. One of the struggles is that the information available on this stuff is limited. There's not really, I would say there's few groups doing any research on this that are not biased one way or the other. Most of the research seems to come straight out of the Guttmacher Institute. So far, the only thing that I've found to kind of offer a criticism of that has been Dr. Attila Varszegi. I think there's a growing number, but again, a lot of that is coming from pro-life sources. So that's an issue. We would ideally want a neutral source to do that. Again, other aspects as well. What is the use of the abortion rate? That's a question that I had throughout this. Why do we bother with it? The pro-life perspective, for the most part, is exactly what you echoed, which is that the abortion ratio is far more useful because a pro-life perspective is interested in the percentage of babies that aren't being aborted. The reason the abortion ratio is used, or the abortion rate, is because it actually does provide information on, not particularly specific information, but more so on birth control. So on the idea of a combined statistic of a lower abortion rate would mean that you're having less pregnancies probably and less abortions through that method. I'm really bad at articulating it. I'm personally anti-abortion. That is, I'm trying to kind of come at that angle. That is what I've seen from people that I've debated with and discussed about. That seems to be, it's still not perfect. It's a flawed rate because, as I've shown, population plays a big role in it. But that's kind of their look at it. Yeah. Okay, cool.
I do actually. How do we get the data on Canadian abortion numbers? Because to the best of my understanding, Stats Canada wasn't allowed to provide that information.
Interesting.
It's too politically charged. Facts are too political.
It's on his site. It's at the bottom of it. I'll pull it up. I'll see.
Do you know where he gets it from? Is it a person who does it, or is it an organization called?
I think it might be a person. I don't know. We'll take a look. Johnston Archive, Canada. Oh, breaks it down by province. We don't want that though. Give me actual.
Is there all?
There we go.
So this is the breakdown. This was interesting. You'll notice he uses 15 to 39 for his abortion rate, which is why his numbers are a little bit. His abortion rate numbers are slightly bigger. But again, that shouldn't make a difference to the actual. Shouldn't make a big difference to the actual abortion.
Institute for Health Information.
Boom. So he's using induced abortions reported in Canada in 2007, induced abortions reported in Canada in 2008. So he's citing the Canadian Institute for Health Information. Going back, he's got the years.
Canada as well.
Yeah, Statistics Canada for several of the years here. Births and deaths.
Which years are those for Stats Canada?
1997
Yeah.
is the early. What do we have here? Induced Abortion, a World Review by the Population Council for 1981.
I think it was around 2005 that Stats Canada decided they weren't going to do that anymore, so that would make
Interesting.
sense.
Well, because you're not required to report the numbers, so, and that's
Yeah.
where like the key phrase being, numbers reported, so I'm assuming, I'm pretty sure with Canadian estimates, there is some kind of vicarious extrapolation that has to
And you can
happen.
see it actually in here. He does use brackets for some of the later years. Yeah, you can see here. He's got official recorded numbers on the left, with the bracket being slightly higher. It's starting in 2002. As you go down, by the time it gets to 2012, there's no more. Is that a thing? There's no more official stats.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. That's illustrated. But again, I mean the historical aspect of it, which is what we were looking at.
The best way to make informed policy decisions is to refuse to collect data on your
Exactly,
policies.
because it's too offensive to know what's happening.
Yeah. So that's in there. Yeah, it's shown in here. And anyways, the list is there. There could be problems with it. Absolutely.
Well, like you said, it seems like pretty legitimate if you say right off the bat that those numbers and brackets are extrapolated.
One other interesting tidbit that I realized I didn't include, but I was kind of planning on including, you guys probably know more about this. There's an abortion doctor. What was his name?
Gosnell?
Say again?
Gosnell?
No. There was a fellow who made up the abortion, the maternal mortality numbers.
Bernard Nathanson, he talked about how they essentially pulled the number out of a hat.
So that was one thing I was actually going to throw into. I found a little bit biased thing, I suppose, but no. I mean, that's the thing is the initial numbers for, was this for the United States of America?
United States.
So for Roe v. like pre-Roe v. Wade type stuff.
Yeah, and he talked about how he's like, and honestly the actual estimate was probably a few hundred deaths nationally a year, but we told people it was in like the tens of thousands, and yeah, he said we didn't have a source for that, we just kind of made up the number because it sounded good. And then of course because he was one of the co-founders of UAlberta Pro-Choice America, which is still around today, later became Catholic and then became pro-life and all of that stuff, and so he wrote about kind of his experiences through that, and it kind of shows you that a lot of it was very seedy advocacy.
So that's kind of it. Is that, I think that's why I didn't include, because again, you're seeing this is the issue fundamentally. This becomes a hard thing to try to be neutral on, because most of the things you're saying, it comes from pro-life or pro-choice perspective, so you have to kind of pick. That's why I really like the Mexico thing. That's why I focused on the Mexico thing, because I do think that is a really interesting look that we can look at and say this is actually trying to be objective. But that's just one example of saying
and that's where, and this is something that, it's hard because it is a very distinct skill set, but one of the important things is just because something comes from a biased source, like either way, it doesn't automatically prove or disprove its validity.
Yes.
But it does mean well, I mean, with all sources, you should be evaluating the methodology of the study and hearing the back and forth about why is this methodology valid, why is it not. But of course, the average person is not a scientist or a social scientist. I know, I can barely make heads or tails out of most studies, and so it's hard because you're trying to. That's why statistics are so slippery, because you have to have a very particular skill set to correctly evaluate and interpret them. And so oftentimes people just oversimplify that to, well, I trust this source more than this source, therefore I'm going to believe these numbers.
Which is that little cartoon of the first guy at the front, like, this guy says I'm right and everyone else is stupid, so yeah, I believe this, yeah. Cool. I think we're done.
Right.
Thanks you guys for coming, yeah.
Yeah, let's give another round of applause.
Well, thank you guys. guys for coming. I'm really happy with the turnout, especially since it was quite an effort to get Attila down here. So really happy. Thank you so much for coming. We are planning to go down to Sherlock's and have a drink. Please join us if you can. Yeah, and if you have any more questions, then you can poke at Attila's brain.